Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We are presented by The Athletic. Today on the show, Adam Spinella is in the building. We're going to dive deep into NBA Offseason recaps. We're going to do the first 10 teams in the alphabet today. That includes the Atlanta Hawks, the Boston Celtics, the Brooklyn Nets, the Charlotte Hornets, the Chicago Bulls, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Dallas Mavericks, the Denver Nuggets, the Detroit Pistons, and the Golden State Warriors. And I swear I will not say Charlotte that weirdly again this episode. We're going to start a little bit with the FIBA World Cup because we got some weird results over the weekend. I have not yet watched the Canada-Spain game, so I don't want to dive too much into that. But I do want to talk about Team USA's loss to Lithuania last night and the general tenor of Australia being eliminated from this World Cup, despite featuring something like 10 NBA players on this roster. Adam, you are over there in the DMV. What's going on, buddy?
Hey, Sam. It's a great day. It's Labor Day weekend here. And while I'm still somewhat laboring because I'm just trying to get ready for the school year, we got to see my Lithuanian national team in action. I am have an honorary Lithuanian, so to speak. This jersey on the wall with my name on it behind me was a gift from a former player that I coached who is Lithuanian and bestowed that honor upon me. So there's a little bit of pride running right now, but an interesting and a fun game I'm looking forward to talk about, as well as diving into some of the results of the summer here as we preview the next NBA season.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Okay, let's start there. Team USA loses to Lithuania last night, 110-104. The fact that Lithuania scored 110 points in a 40-minute game, you can chalk some of that up to some late game shenanigans by Team USA, fouling late and trying to, extend the game. Ton of possessions late in that game. Having said that, 110 feels right because the issue for Team USA right now is on the defensive end, I think. And let's start here. The two main things that it felt like stood out to me in this game were, first, the pick and roll defense just did not have any real synergy for Team USA. It seemed like they didn't really have a plan. Some of the defense in space by the bigs was a problem. Obviously, Lithuania tried to get Austin Reeves switched onto bigs pretty regularly. That was a real problem. The second issue is the rebounding issue. And that's whereas I think they can kind of work on the defensive continuity a little bit. Like, you can get more comfortable with one another. You can practice. You can try and develop like a little bit of a plan of attack over the course of the next couple of days. The rebounding issue is one that is concerning to me because Jaren Jackson just has never been a great rebounder for a big, obviously, and he is your anchor. He's your centerpiece, the guy you need out there. Brandon Ingram, for as big and long as he is, not a great rebounder. Mikal Bridges, not a great rebounder for his size. Anthony Edwards, I think, has done like a pretty okay job, like crashing in from the perimeter and grabbing rebounds. Tyrese Halliburton at times as well has done an okay job there. But the bigs, particularly, it felt like to me, did not have a great plan of attack in terms of boxing out and rebounding against Lithuania. And that feels like a real worry. The Lithuanians had 18 offensive rebounds in this game. That's a lot. Like, Tadas Sedekerskis and Jonas Valanciunas, by the way, Jonas didn't even get any offensive rebounds in that game, but just his ability to carve out space and carve out dudes around him and allow his men to crash in and grab the rebounds, I thought was really important. I thought that Lithuania had a great game plan to take advantage of Team USA. And that feels concerning to me against some of these bigger teams, or if they run into Lithuania again.
Yeah, big shout out to Lithuania first and foremost for the game plan, the execution. They were poised and primed to take advantage of every miscue that USA made and really surgically and tactically just were dialed in on what mismatches they needed to go at certain periods of time. As soon as Austin Reeves gets subbed in, boom, try to post them up with their bigger wings and UCLA actions. As soon as USA went a little bit smaller with Banchero or even Portis at times kind of playing the 5 in some lineups, like switch, draw it out, throw the ball inside, and force USA to collapse and help. They were great with their opportunistic ability on that end of the floor. And then they had the right game plan of clogging the lane against USA and trying to turn them into a little bit of a jump shooting team. The defense stuff for Team USA continues to be really frustrating because Jaren Jackson Jr., for as good of a defender as he is on ball screens and versatile in the ways that he can do different coverages, he's not rebounded well, and he has gotten himself into a lot of foul trouble in the minutes that he's played. Yeah. And when you commit to playing him in maybe more of like a drop coverage or trying to keep him closer to the basket, the idea here when you go against bigs like Jonas Valanciunas or in the Montenegro game against Nikola Vucevic is to prevent USA's wings 1 through 4 from switching. When Steve Kerr made the decision to start Josh Hart kind of at the 4, so to speak, USA is smaller on the wings at the 3 and the 4 spots. And as a result of that, a lot of these international teams who either play 2 bigs or have a 4-man who can take advantage of you inside and out will find ways to post you up. So the idea here was to mitigate those advantages by not switching with Jaren Jackson Jr. But as we have seen throughout this tournament, when he's not on the floor, what is USA's answer at the 5? They don't really have a guy that can play against the 5 without being in switching coverage. That's where we've seen Paolo Banchero get the most of his opportunity in minutes. And I think each of the last 2 games have highlighted some of the challenges he has if he's not playing in a switch everything type of scheme. Walker Kessler's minutes weren't great today. He got in foul trouble a little bit early, and Valanciunas was able to punk him a little bit with some pump fakes to and ones and just really won the positional battle between those 2 inside. But everything to me stems from USA searching for an answer, not just with coverages, but personnel and kind of lineups in that regard. And when you have 12 NBA players and really, really talented guys who you're trying to juggle everything with and make sure they all get some minutes, it can be very easy to find yourself with a mismatched lineup that doesn't make a ton of sense on the floor at one time. And Lithuania just punished the USA every single time. One of those 5-man combinations didn't make perfect sense.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying there is right. And my issue is just how do you fix it at the end of the day, right? Like that's what I'm trying to figure out is just like how Team USA kind of goes about adjusting for the next game. And I'm honestly not sure I have the answer to that right now. They play Italy. Italy is a worse team. That'll be a good adjustment. But yeah, like they need to find some answers. Honestly, losing this game, probably a blessing in disguise on some level. They would have played Serbia in the quarterfinals. Had they won this game, they now play Italy in the quarterfinals, which is a real win for them. I don't know. Like you can look at it positively in that regard, but this is a team that has had some structural flaws. We saw it in the opening games against Germany, for instance, where Germany and Dennis Schroeder really hammered them in ball screens, as you and I talked about. And we saw it against Lithuania, that they're teams that can really run high-level ball screen action can cause this USA team problems. And we will see how it goes. I will say, Dirty Dancer in the YouTube comments, by the way, if you're watching, go watch on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, please. We're going to have some interactive elements for the off-season recaps. It's going to be fun. Rokas Jokubaitis looks like a real NBA player. Yes. Yep. Rokas looked great, I thought. He had 6 assists in that game. I thought he was consistently awesome getting the Lithuanians in and out of their actions. Rokas looked great.
They just looked like a well-oiled machine top to bottom. Really fun game and performance from them. They run good stuff. They don't take a ton of bad shots. they kind of made the little plays that fall into their lap at times when you need, like, I think it was Mindagos Kuzminskis who just hit that end of shot clock at like fumbling out
another
of bounds.
Knicks legend.
Another Knicks legend right there.
Mindy Kuz.
Yeah, that was one of those like Jordan shrug shots. Like, well, I don't know. It just kind of happened to go in. And like when you make as many threes as they did in the first half and get out to that, like, yeah, basketball breaks that way sometimes. And USA, like, give them credit for the way that they clawed back in the second half. And Anthony Edwards was somewhat heroic with his offensive performance and trying to carry things for them. But
like he was back in the Lahaina Civic Center against Michigan State.
Yep,
the ultimate trying game. To carry them back. It was great.
That was the best game. Best game.
Anthony Edwards, in I think it was like his 5th game at Georgia. Michigan State got up like 30 in the first half against Georgia, and Ant just caught fire and dropped like 35 in the second half against Michigan State. It was amazing. Shout out the Lahaina Civic Center, by the way. People in obviously Maui are going through a tough time right now, so shout out to them. But let's maybe move on from the USA and talk about Australia for 5 minutes real quick, because I need to talk about that for my people here. Here's the deal. So I went on Chris Anstey and Mark Worthington's Has Been Hoops podcast. Go listen to that. It was a really fun episode. They're the best. I love them. They'll be on the show at some point. This one, that is. And what Chris brought up was this idea that Australia can medal in any tournament, and they can finish somewhere between 8th and 10th in every tournament, basically, depending on the day and depending on just the performances they get from their players, right? And to me, that felt right at the time. I told Chris at the time that felt right. And I think that really bore itself out. They got an horrible draw, first and foremost. Like, you end up in a first group with Germany, Finland, and Japan. And then in your second group, you end up opposite Slovenia, who you just played in the bronze medal match of the Olympics. Like, one of Germany, Australia, and Slovenia was always going to go home. And that made it difficult, I think, for anyone in that circumstance, because those are 3 of the best 8 teams in the world. Having said that, this Australian team was kind of a mess. All due respect to them, I thought that they never had a real level of cohesion on offense, in large part because they never found the lineup structures that really worked. And to me, I think Brian Goorjian is a great basketball coach. And I think that, obviously he was instrumental in leading Australia over the course of the last, years here. I did not think he coached his best tournament here, is what I would say. I don't think that the selection of players was phenomenal. I think that he took a roster that had no shooting. It had very little creation outside of Josh Giddey and Patty Mills. And when they really needed that secondary creation, they got some of it from Dante Exum, but there was no shooting and no floor spacing for those guys to attack. Josh Giddey shot like 70% from 2-point range in this tournament, despite the fact that this team really only had Patty Mills as like a plus shooter. Like, Joe Ingles did not play wildly well. Let's just leave it at that. I thought Nick Kay really struggled. I think they were hoping that Nick Kay was going to be able to play high level minutes at the 4, and they'd be able to play 2 bigs with Kay and Dwap Reith, and that both of those guys can kind of shoot. Teams don't really give a shit if they shoot. Like, they want, that is part of their defensive scheme. They want Dwap Reith and Nick Kay shooting, and neither of those guys really were able to take advantage of that fact. So for this next tournament, which is the Olympics in 2024 in Paris, like, Australia needs to kind of go back to the drawing board a little bit and find some shooting and be willing to play at shooting. Like they had Chris Golding on this roster. Chris Golding has been the best shooter in the NBL for years upon years now. It was weird to me that Gorgon did not play Chris Golding all that much. I get that you make some real defensive trade-offs with Golding, but that's the advantage of having Josh Green and Xavier Cooks and Dante Exum and Matisse Thybulle on this roster is you're able to pair Chris Golding with guys that can really defend. So yeah, to me, this was obviously a very disappointing result for the Australians. And I thought that the coaching could have been better. And I do just want to note, like they got hammered with Jock Londale going out, the game before the World Cup, right? Jock Londale doesn't go out. This is probably a different World Cup for them. They probably beat Germany because what really happened in that Germany game was, Daniel Tice and guys like that were able to like hammer them in a real way. The bigs really struggled in that game for Germany or for Australia against Germany. I'm sorry. If Jock Londale's on this team, I think that they get through to the quarterfinals and all bets are off. It's just, they need to find one more big. Maybe it's Ben Simmons. Maybe he's able to come in and play that role. And they need to find more shooting and floor spacing. Like you have to do it. And the popular name out there is like naturalizing Bryce Cotton and using him instead of Matisse Thybulle. I saw Trevor Gleason said that. I actually would probably do that. Just the only reason, and look, I don't know if Bryce Cotton's going to be able to get naturalized. That has been a fraught process seemingly over here. The reason I would do that is because you have all of this overlap with Thybulle. You have Cooks, you have Josh Green, you have Dante Exum, you have all of these athletic, defensive-minded players that you can make it work with. You don't really have anyone other than Patty Mills that can be like a dynamic scorer outside of Josh Giddey, who's like a driving and attacking and transition threat. So yeah, I am. It was a weird tournament for Australia. I would say a weird tournament.
Yeah, shooting matters a lot in modern basketball, and they were about 2 to 3 shooters short on the court at a time. So that catches up with you.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's my 5-minute rant on Australia. And look, like I think the Australian public does need to come to terms with the fact that the Australian national team is a genuinely great team worldwide now. That does not mean that they are going to medal or finish in the top 5 of every tournament at this point. It's just kind of not the reality of where they sit. Teams like Germany, Spain, Slovenia, Lithuania, the United States, they're all Canada, certainly after the way that they just beat Spain. They're all certainly on this level. And there are others that are certainly on this level too. Serbia is another one, right? Like Australia is not just going to waltz into every tournament now and like make the quarterfinals. Like you get caught with a bad draw like they did, it's going to be a problem. Like they can lose. Josh Giddey is great. Patty Mills is still Patty Mills when he puts on an Australian jersey. It's just, it's not automatic is my point here.
Yeah. But man, isn't the game of basketball worldwide in such a great place right now? How many teams are able to field competitive, deep groups that can play cohesive basketball and push the top talents in the world? Like having 9 to 10 NBA players on a roster doesn't mean a whole lot if the fit and the cohesion doesn't necessarily work. You can't just out talent people anymore. And to me, that is such a good thing for where the game of basketball is right now and where it continues to be headed.
Yeah, that is right. Okay. We're going to take a quick commercial break. Then we're going to get into off-season previews. We're going to start with the Hawks. All right, Adam. we are going to start off-season previews or recaps. I keep saying previews. My God, we're doing off-season recaps. The 2023 off-season has basically come to an end, I guess. There are still moves out there. Joel Embiid could get moved at any time. Or not Joel Embiid, I'm sorry. Damian Lillard could get moved at any time. James Harden could get moved at any time. Certainly not Joel Embiid. He ain't going anywhere this year.
You scared the shit out of me, Sam.
Joel isn't going anywhere. My brain broke for a second.
Yeah.
I confused James Harden with Joel Embiid in my brain. It's early over here, Adam. Come on. What is it? It's 9:30 a.m.
Okay.
We're tired. Okay. So the offseason isn't like a done deal. On top of that, there are players that are extension eligible. Everybody in the 2020 draft that has not yet signed an extension and was a first round pick, still extension eligible. Plenty of veterans around the league are extension eligible. So there are quite a few players here that are in limbo in some way, could get a different contract than what currently exists. We've broken all that out with these little handy graphics. Everything you need to know about a team's offseason. So we're going to start with the Atlanta Hawks. The Atlanta Hawks signed DeJounte Murray to a 4-year, $114 million contract extension. They signed Wes Matthews to a 1-year, $3.2 million contract. They waived Tyrese Martin, Vic Krejci. They signed Miles Norris and Seth Lundy to 2 ways. In the draft, they took Kobe Buffkin at number 15. He's a 6'4" combo guard from Michigan. They acquired the number 39 overall pick in order to take Mo Gay, a 6'11" center from Washington State. They think he's a forward. I disagree. They used the number 46 pick on Seth Lundy, that 6'5" wing. And then they traded John Collins to Utah for Rudy Gay and a 2026 second round pick. That created a $25 million trade exception that they then used to acquire Ty in the second deal that I will allude to momentarily. They still have $23 million of this trade exception for John Collins available to them. The Hawks also participated in this weird multi-team deal where they moved Alpha Kaba for Ty Washington, Usman Garuba, and a 2028 second. They then traded Rudy Gay, Usman Garuba, and Ty for Patty Mills and a future second. All told, they basically picked up 2 seconds in Patty Mills for Alpha Kaba, which is good work. The big thing for Atlanta here, in my opinion, though, that we have to talk about is their biggest addition is not going to come from anybody they acquired. It's going to come in the form of Quinn Snyder, who is their coach.
Yep.
And will hopefully be bringing a bit more of a modern offensive style than what Nate McMillan was able to over the years.
Yeah, that was a team that was, I believe, dead last during the regular season in 3-point attempts per game or percentage of shots that came from 3. And correct me if I'm wrong, either Sam or somebody in the comments section. But when you have Trae Young and a couple other pretty good floor spacers on this roster, that seems not ideal. So Quinn Snyder being inserted as the head coach here is going to allow this offense, because we know he's very 3-point friendly, loves to have ball movement centric offenses. And once they create dribble penetration, that thing just flies around, extra pass, and finds the right guy. This is a team who should expect a reasonable bump in their offensive production just by taking different shots with similar personnel. And you sprinkle into that, like the John Collins trade and deal was not a great one for them from a return standpoint, right? They shed some assets, and yes, they have this trade exception they can use, but by and large, this is a team that I think wants to avoid the tax. So you lose a guy like John Collins. I don't want to call this addition by subtraction, but I think far too many times during the offseason, we look at all of these moves individually and grade them out, and then trying to average all of those grades together to just lump it onto what the Hawks or whatever team we're talking about, what their offseason looks like. To me, I try to think of it a little bit more of, are you better now than you were in April, May, June? Did you improve as a team? Is there something that gives me more hope that this season will be better? I could care a little bit less about the weeds and the return on each deal if I feel like the group fits more cohesively right now. And it's not just having Quinn Snyder, who's going to modernize their offensive approach. Instead, I really like the depth of wings they have who can play both the 3 and the 4, which is a style that Quinn Snyder has proven he can have success with on both ends of the floor. To me, that's where my excitement comes for Atlanta, is knowing that guys like Saddiq Bey and AJ Griffin and DeAndre Hunter are going to be able to explode a little bit more because John Collins isn't around and because they're playing for a coach who's going to know how to utilize them best on the offensive end.
So just a few things that stand out to me in terms of the roster here, right? First and foremost, they did the most important thing that they can do, which is re-sign DeJounte Murray to a contract extension that I think is going to look phenomenal as he continues to age. I think that number to get him at like 28 million a year, that's just an unbelievable contract as long as he stays healthy. That is by far the most important thing. And on some level, that alone makes this offseason kind of a win for them. It's not like an enormous win. I don't think they took like a huge leap or anything. But getting DeJounte locked down for 4 more years is a big number. Now, what immediately stands out to me about moving John Collins is A, it does make the pieces potentially make a little bit more sense in Atlanta. B, it is a real bet on the young players that Travis Schlenk, when he was running the Atlanta Hawks front office, accumulated over the course of his time. Think about guys like Jalen Johnson, like DeAndre Hunter, certainly Bogdan Bogdanovic. Then after he left, Saddiq Bey, AJ Griffin. These guys, Schlenk might have been there when AJ was taken, but that seems like it wasn't necessarily Schlenk's call at that point. All of those guys are now going to be lifted into roles that are really important for the Hawks this year. The Hawks need AJ Griffin to be able to knock down shots. They need Jalen Johnson to be able to provide athletic, versatile defense. They need Saddiq Bey to knock down shots and provide like a bigger framed guy at the 3 and the 4. It's an interesting bet to make. I do like it, I think. The other piece of this that is still up in the air is the center position. They can get 48 great minutes defensively from Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu. But as I write here, the next pieces are that Saddiq Bey, Onyeka Okongwu, and Clint Capella are all still extension eligible at this point. They're the 3 guys that the Hawks have to make decisions on. And if I'm the Hawks, I don't know if I make decisions on any of these guys right now. I might, like, if I could get Onyeka at a great deal, like if I could get him at like 460 or something like that, like if I get 458 or whatever the Robert Williams deal is, I would probably try and do that because I think Onyeka Okongwu is an awesome player and I think he is someone worth continuing to invest resources in. But if I'm Onyeka Okongwu, I don't know if I want to sign a deal until I know what is going on with Clint Capella. Because if you're Onyeka's camp, right, like San Antonio potentially has an awesome center position available next to Victor Wembanyama in the offseason. They're going to have all the cap space in the world. And that's an interesting player to put next to Vic, right? Like there are going to be a number of places where Onyeka will be really valued. And it feels like to me, the Hawks have never quite allowed him to not just thrive, but to like flourish and round out his game in a way that I would be really interested in. So the Hawks offseason to me, the story of it is A, getting DeJounte Murray under contract for the next 5 years. That's the most important thing they could have done. The offseason's a win because of that. But B, it's a huge bet on these young wings and these young guys coming through the system and being able to make a real tangible impact, not just in 2 years, but kind of this season. Like they actually need them right now.
Yeah, and look, I like a lot of these guys individually, so I'm going to be higher on the Atlanta Hawks and really give them the benefit of the doubt that like this was a positive move. I genuinely like all 4 or 5 of those kind of younger wings who have been in the rotation. Consistency is going to be key. And I think that's probably what keeps this team from being like maybe the difference between 38 and 45 wins for them is going to be how consistent that rotation and core really is and tends to be. But, you know, we don't talk enough about the stars of the team here. Like this is Trae Young and DeJounte Murray having another year to continue to gel and learn how to play with each other. Again, they're doing so for a coach in Quinn Snyder who has made these 2 guard things work before. He did so with Mitchell and Conley and different guys in Utah. He's going to be able to do that here in Atlanta. I still think I feel like I say this every offseason and like it never comes to fruition. Like we need more Trae Young off ball. We need more of him coming off of screens, of him being willing to not just run the pick and roll time and time again, because he is a legitimate gravity seeking threat when he is standing on the perimeter. He has seemed a little reluctant. I'm not pinning this on him necessarily, but there seems to be some reluctance in not letting Trae Young just high pick and roll every single time. I'd like to see that change a little bit this year.
Well, the other big piece of this too is that Quinn Snyder has coached essentially 2 lead-ish guards in Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell. One of them focused a little bit more scoring. One of them focused a little bit more on playmaking. Whereas I think that DeJounte and Trae have like a bit more of a mix than both of those guys had in Utah. I'm really interested to see how Quinn Snyder can get the most out of that duo moving forward. The last quick thing, let's just talk about the draft very briefly.
Yep.
Kobe Buffkin, Mo Gay, Seth Lundy. I loved the Kobe Buffkin pick. You and I both are enormous Kobe Buffkin fans. I would not expect much of him this season necessarily, but I love him as a third guard within that triumvirate of Trae Young and DeJounte Murray long-term more than anything. Like I think that having Kobe as like your secondary playmaker with either of those guys out there is going to be really, really effective. I was not a big Mo Gay believer. He has an incredible amount of athletic tools, but I worry that he's not really a center defensively, despite the fact that I think he kind of needs to be a center. Just in terms of what the role is going to be for him, he's really going to have to shoot it, like really, really, really going to have to shoot it, I think. And then finally, Seth Lundy is just like a solid, 46th overall, 23-year-old, 24-year-old, 3-and-D wing. Do you have any strong thoughts before we move on from Atlanta?
I don't know if I have any strong thoughts, like echo what you're saying there about Kobe Buffkin in that regard. This is a group that had Ty Washington and Usman Garuba and made different moves to try to navigate things around for Patty Mills and some future draft picks and things like that. I thought Usman Garuba would have been a really good fit next to Trae Young in some regard as like your third break glass in case of emergency big. We've seen in the past playing overseas, he was a pretty proficient short roll playmaker when he's paired with a guy that commands traps. Like I thought that would have been a good spot for him. Maybe developmental minutes in the backcourt for Ty. I think Patty helps more this year, no doubt. But, there was an opportunity to add a little bit more young depth to the roster. I found it interesting that they're going in the directions of both getting underneath the tax and making a more like veteran type of move to get a guy like Patty Mills as opposed to those two. That sat interestingly with me.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Okay, let's move to team 2, the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics had one of the more active off seasons that you will see. I didn't think I recognized that at the time, but their off season was actually quite important. Let's start with the trades because I think that the trade section is actually the one that saw the most roster movement, at least. They moved Marcus Smart, Danilo Gallinari, Mike Muscala, and the 35th overall pick in 2023 for Kristaps Porzingis, the number 25 pick, and the Warriors 2024 first round pick in a 3-team deal with Washington and Memphis. They get essentially 2 first-round picks and Kristaps for Marcus Smart, which is really good asset management, in my opinion, by Boston. They also traded Grant Williams, who was a restricted free agent, to the Dallas Mavericks for essentially 3 second-round picks. That created a $6.2 million trade exception. And then the most important part of their offseason was actually the contracts they handed out. They signed Jaylen Brown to this enormous 5-year, $288 million max extension. Then they extended Kristaps Porzingis to a 2-year, $60 million extension after acquiring him in that deal. They signed O'Shea Brissett and Delano Banton. They still have Jason Tatum, who I don't think can actually sign an extension because his max number is set to just continue to rise. Derek White, Malcolm Brogdon, and Peyton Pritchard as potential extension candidates. If I was them, I would be trying to sign Derek White to an extension. I think that just makes a lot of sense for them. Also on draft night, they were the most active team in terms of trades. Deep breath. They traded the number 25 overall pick for number 31 and 2 future seconds. They traded number 31 for number 34 and 39. They traded number 34 for number 38 and a future second. They then traded number 39 for a future second. All told, they traded number 25 and acquired 5 second-round picks, 4 of those in future drafts, and they used one of those picks, the one at number 38 overall, to take Jordan Walsh, the 6'7" wing with an enormous wingspan and who performed quite well at Summer League, from Arkansas. Okay, that's a lot.
Ooh.
Do you think that this offseason will be remembered as the one that they locked into Jaylen Brown's max extension, or the one where they moved Marcus Smart? Because both of those are seismic moves in different ways.
I will remember it as the one where they dealt Marcus Smart, more so because I kind of expected the Jaylen Brown extension. Marcus Smart has become kind of the cultural leader in Boston in so many different ways over the last decade that trade kind of came out of nowhere for me. When you look at what they got for making that deal, I think you do it 10 times out of 10. But that one did catch me by surprise a little bit. And I think that it's a very different type of move by Brad Stevens in the Celtics front office to go in on being a little bit bigger, that the Porzingis, Rob Williams, Horford triad at the 4 and the 5 really locks them into not just having great depth in the front court by playing those 3 in versatile kind of lineups together, but playing Tatum at the 3 and Brown at the 2, which makes the Celtics freaking massive. And they're going to be a tough team to match up with.
They're really big. They are the thing that I felt like they have. I don't want to say they lacked, but I felt like they needed another option as a rim protection candidate next to Rob Williams. When Rob is out there, Rob is obviously an enormous rim protector. I feel like that is kind of the piece of Al Horford's game that has been just a little bit less active over the course of the last year. And getting Kristaps, I think it went way under the radar how good Kristaps was last season. This was the best season of his career. Kristaps Porzingis was everything that people like kind of envisioned him being when he came out of like Spain and ultimately Latvia, which is where he's originally from, but he played in Sevilla for Spain when he was pre-draft. Like, averaged 23 points, 8.4 rebounds. He shot 39% on 5.5 3-point attempts per game. I would bet for Boston that number's going up near 7 or 8 this year. He is going to be a pick and pop dude this year. Shot 49% from the field, almost 50% from the field, 85% from the line. Finally has like improved a little bit as like a passer and decision maker, feels like to me. He's not like a total sieve there. Used to be that you could like really pressure him, it felt like, to cause issues. The other piece of this is, and I don't want to like overemphasize this maybe a little bit, but at the end of games, when you watch Boston, the Celtics' biggest issue last year was end of game execution.
Oh, yeah.
It felt like they didn't have a hierarchy in terms of like who was going to be the guy. And often it resulted in Marcus deciding to take over and kind of be the guy, right? We can be honest about that. And that's not what you want when you have Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown on this roster. I do wonder if on some level, it's a great deal because you got Kristaps Porzingis, who's a great fit for the Celtics, who is a great fit for this offense because they love spacing from the 5, all of that. And then you get the 2 first-round picks as well, what they've turned into 1 first-round pick and like 5 second-round picks. I do wonder if part of this deal for Boston on some level was getting Marcus Smart out of there offensively and out of the engine room, despite the fact that he is such a leader. Because he's such a leader, he felt like he needed to take over in those moments a little bit. I wonder if part of this is just handing over the team to Jaylen and Jason a little bit more, saying that this is your team now. We're going to go as far as your leadership takes us in addition to your skills.
Well, it's funny. I was having a conversation with a couple of buddies of mine who follow the Celtics pretty closely and are, shrewd basketball minds. And the question they asked me was, what does Marcus Smart do that Derek White doesn't, other than take a couple bad shots a game? And
I think Derek is better than Marcus at this point, but I know that that's an unpopular opinion.
Sure. And I think that's the point that they're trying to make, right? Like it's so close and it's close enough, and the roles that they fill for the Celtics team are going to be similar, that if you can turn Smart, who might even be a little bit redundant when you have both him and White, into front court floor spacing and all-star level production from Porzingis, and all of these future assets that Brad Stevens is someday going to trade away because he doesn't want to make a first-round pick ever, it seems like it's a good deal for the Celtics. It really, really is. And look, that 2024 first from Golden State, I think is going to probably be a valuable trade chip for them around the deadline this year, and allow them to figure out what their depth issues might be and find a way to include that to address them.
Yeah. And look, the Celtics do have their own first round pick as well. Mm-hmm. So, they have 2 picks that basically you would anticipate being in the 18 to 30 range, let's call it. I think there probably would be value in them, especially with Jaylen and Jason, using both of those picks, frankly, given how expensive Jaylen and Jason are about to get together. If you have any chance of retaining both of them long-term, you probably do need to get some really high level, rookie scale talent in the door. I also think they probably will look at potential trade chips with each of those picks if both come to fruition. Let's talk very briefly about Jaylen Brown, though. This isn't the way this has been like framed by some people is very strange to me. This is a deal Boston like unequivocally had to do.
Had to.
Look, you can be worried about Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum making 70% of your cap long-term together if you really want to be, I guess. But what this does is it gives you a 2-year window before Jason Tatum's next contract kicks in to where they can actually try and like really go at this. And in the NBA, a 2-year window is all you can really ask for at this point. With the way the player movement is now, with the way that, guys will ask out, with the way that the league continues to shift and fundamentally alter every year as new talent enters and talent exits and everything. A 2-year window where you have all your guys locked in basically, and you have a chance to win a title with your core. That's the best you can do. And the Celtics have set themselves up through this Jaylen Brown contract where he is now going to make more money guaranteed than any player in NBA history, at least for now, until, next off season. They have set themselves up with that 2-year window, and that's what they had to do. They have opened up the window as wide as humanly possible. Maybe they win one, maybe they don't, but as a front office, that's the only thing you can do is set yourself up with the widest, best possible window you can to win an NBA title.
Totally agree. And I know that there's frustration about certain areas of Jalen's game that haven't necessarily improved, mainly kind of his handle and the tightness and crispness of that. Look, this is a dude who just continues to get better at something year after year and is an incredibly valuable two-way player, a guy who off court is as impeccable of an NBA player as you can find in terms of not worrying about him in the locker room and making sure that he's going to have great contributions to the community. It's a home run to retain Jaylen Brown, keep Jason Tatum happy, keep this window open. The number is going to be the number. It's what the going rate is for these guys based on where the cap is headed and how things have just unfolded with the league making such a boom over the last decade. It's a jarring number to see. He's worth every penny.
Yeah. Look, they take up about 50% of the cap next season. They take up about 60% of the cap in 2024-25. It's about right for your two best players. The next offseason is the one where it gets really crazy for them. You just kind of got to roll with it and you got to rock with it and see what happens. Hopefully Boston is able to win a title for their sake. If not, we'll see. We'll see where it goes. I thought their draft moves were intriguing. They added something like 8 second-round picks and a first this offseason. Again, a team that is going to need cheap players around Jalen and Jason if they want to keep this core together long term. I understand why they went about it this way. Losing Grant Williams probably does not help, but he probably was also a bit superfluous on this roster at this point. You could use him situationally, but for the price tag of, $13 to $14 million. Yeah. I think all of this lines up, and I think that this was a good offseason for Boston at the end of the day. They did all of the moves that it wasn't the moves they had to make, but I like all of the moves they did make.
Yeah, and year after year, I find myself saying pretty much that exact same thing. Like Brad Stevens has proven to be very shrewd in how he manages making this roster better from June to September.
Yep. Okay. Next up, the Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets did not have a wildly busy offseason. It was done pretty early, I guess I would say. It was basically done by July 1st. They signed Cam Johnson to his 4-year, $94.5 million contract. That deal contains $18 million in incentives per sport track. They signed Dennis Smith Jr., one of my favorite, under the radar signings of this entire offseason. Yeah. I love that they got Dennis. They signed Lonnie Walker to a minimum deal. They signed Darius Baisley, Trendon Watford, and Armani Brooks. They lose guys like Yuta Watanabe, Edmund Sumner, Seth Curry, a couple others. And then at draft night, everyone talked about them potentially moving up, potentially moving down. They just stayed steady. They took Noah Clowney, Dariq Whitehead, and Jalen Wilson. And then in trades, they moved Joe Harris in 2 seconds to Detroit to dump his cap space, basically in order to pay Cam Johnson so they didn't have a crazy tax bill. And then they traded Patty Mills in 2 seconds to Houston in a cap dump trade that created $19.9 million trade exception in the Joe Harris example, and then also created a $6.8 million trade exception in the Patty Mills example. Kind of a quiet offseason. I don't know that we need to belabor this. Let's just go with this. What did you think of the Cam Johnson number?
It seems all right to me. A little higher. I'm not the biggest Cam Johnson guy in the world, so it was a little higher than maybe I would have gone for him, but I think it's understandable. What do you think of it?
Yeah, so he's going to be making somewhere between, $25 and $22 million basically over the course of the next 4 years. And I think that he probably needs to show just a little bit more off the bounce, a little bit more creativity to be worth that number. But I think there is a chance that he's an asset on that deal as the cap rises. They also did a bit of a funky structure. I think they did like the first year is the most expensive year for Cam Johnson, and they kind of descended it, which is good. Like that will, by the time 2027 rolls around and he's making $21 million or whatever per year, that deal probably will look pretty good as the cap rises. So I think it's a fine number. I didn't like it when it was announced at like 114 or whatever it was announced, but I think that it being more in the vein of like 94 and a half, it makes a little bit more sense to me. The ultimate question I have here with Brooklyn is just where are they headed? This was not a good team after they moved Kyrie and Kevin Durant at the deadline. They kind of backed their way into the playoffs. They did not win a game in the playoffs, if I remember correctly. Might have stole one, but I thought they got swept. It just feels like they're gearing up to try and get a star at this point, and until they're able to find that star, this is just going to be kind of a spinning in circles situation to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. And look, I like many of the individual players that they have on this roster and think that there's a lot of hope and potential for them to contribute to the Nets making a push in a couple years. But I think Mikal Bridges is going to be a little over leveraged in kind of a leading role this year. And we saw a lot of positive progression from him, but I don't think that's necessarily his forte. Like they need a number one option. And, your guess is as good as mine as to how or when they go about getting that guy.
See, and this is where I'm worried because Mikal Bridges has, 3 years left on his deal. So before you have to start like really considering moving him for assets, because he is one of the most valuable assets, I think, on the market for a contending team because of his ability to slide into a role, be an elite level 3-point shooter who can do some things with the ball and be one of the 5 best perimeter defenders in basketball. You really have a 2-year window now to get a star, right?
Yep.
And if you're not able to get that star and then you have to move Mikal Bridges, when he has 1 year left on his deal, you've kind of just spun your wheels a little bit for 2 years here. And I don't think this is a playoff team right now, frankly. All due respect to like Spencer Dinwiddie and Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges. Like we just didn't see anything last year that makes me think that this is a playoff team at the end of the day after they moved Kyrie and KD. The other piece of it is that Nick Claxton, who was their top 5 defender in the NBA last year, he's a free agent after this year. So if they're not winning, you kind of have to really, and he's not extension eligible because he was only on a 2-year deal. You have to really start considering moving him at the deadline if they are on pace for like 30 wins and he kind of indicates that he's going to test free agency. That becomes complicated for them. They need to find a pathway here, and I don't think they found one this offseason. Right. It feels like they're spinning their wheels to try and get a star. Now, let's go here. What did you think of their draft?
It was all right. Not a home run for me. I quite like Dariq Whitehead, but I have my orange flag, so to speak, about his injury history. And, as we covered on draft night and talked about like the surgeon who's performed his second procedure, I believe works for the Brooklyn Nets organization. And, they had to have felt very comfortable with his long-term outlook and trajectory. Otherwise they wouldn't have drafted him. I hope that they just have more information than I do and feel really positive about that. I still get worried about a guy who's got 2 surgeries on the same foot in 1 year span. I'm not a huge Noah Clowney guy, wasn't necessarily pre-draft. I think there's a reasonable world in which he works out for the team and is a good fit next to Nick Claxton long-term. But I don't think either of those guys really helped the Brooklyn Nets this year. I think that this is a long-term pick for a draft. And, I think that this is a team that probably could have used a little bit of their opportunity with either trading up from packaging 21 and 22 together, or going after somebody who can just live in the lane and say, hey, are you ready to come in and help us right away? As the domino that helps attract either another star to say, well, that's an interesting young player. Either I want to go play with him, or we can feature him in a trade to get me there. I don't think Brooklyn got that guy in Clowney or Whitehead.
Yeah, I think Whitehead's interesting. Like if he could be that guy, if he like really hits in some way. I think Clowney is the guy in this draft class. I ranked Clowney, I think at like 22 or something like that. If I could get one back, I think I would rank Clowney lower based off of the research I've done this year, just in terms of like freshmen and being ready to play and how valuable that is. I knew going into the draft that I didn't think he was ready to play in the NBA, and I still like thought the tools were kind of interesting. He's one where I kind of just feel like the value, the time value of like rookie contract value is real. I don't know if he's going to be ready to play by year 2 or even by year 3, frankly. Like he's really going to have to shoot it by year 3, I think, to be able to get into the game.
Yeah, and I had him in the mid 30s on my overall board. Like I get
that's
him.
Where I should have had him.
I get him in theory because he's big and shoots and defends, but I didn't think he was actually great defending in space. So like, is he really somebody that you would trust playing the 4 and not the 5? And then he only shot 28% from 3 last year. Like the shot and the mechanics look good, but historically speaking, you don't get great return from first round picks who shot below 32 or 33% the year that they were coming into the draft. So like, I just wasn't overly enthused with Clowney, even though I understand the tools argument and kind of get him in theory. I wasn't thrilled by what I saw in practice.
Okay, let's move on from the Nets. Next up, we are going to have the Charlotte Hornets. The Charlotte Hornets had a more active offseason than what I think people would remember. They did not participate in any trades, but they had the number 2 overall pick and certainly were active in those trade talks, if you believe some reports. They got offers for those picks at least. Never, whether or not they considered moving them depends on the source you believe, it feels like, in the reporting world. They took Brandon Miller at number 2. I think that's the most important part of their offseason. They took Nick Smith at number 27. They had the number 34 and number 39 picks. They moved up to number 31 to get James Nagy, a 6'10" big man from Barcelona who is very raw offensively, but has just ridiculous athletic tools. And number 41, they took Amari Bailey out of UCLA. The interesting piece of their contractual offseason was getting LaMelo Ball locked into their extension. 5-year, $205.9 million, has Rose Rule language. If he makes All NBA this season, he will make 30% of the cap as opposed to 25% of the cap. They signed PJ Washington to a 3-year, $48 million deal. They signed Miles Bridges to a 1-year, $7.9 million qualifying offer. They signed Frank Ntilikina to try and replace what they lost in Dennis Smith Jr. They signed Leaky Black to a 2-year, 2-way, which is kind of interesting. They still have Gordon Hayward and JT Thor extension eligible. So this was not a great offseason for me for reasons that were both in their control and out of their control, maybe is a fair way to put it. In their control, they could have just taken Scoot Henderson, right? And as we talked about ad nauseum, I don't know that we need to like relitigate necessarily. Yeah. I would have taken Scoot Henderson at number 2. I think that he and LaMelo could have played together. I see no reason to, not have those two play together. They both like the ball in their hands. Sure. Scoot Henderson played without the ball in his hands. LaMelo Ball's played without the ball in his hands occasionally. With Charlotte, I think you can make this work. I think you can do it. LaMelo is much better guarding off the ball. Like it's so bizarre to me that they, felt like that wasn't going to work for some reason, but they took Brandon and that's fine. Brandon is a good basketball player and he'll be good. I think they missed an opportunity there, those we've talked about a lot.
Yep.
The reason out of their control to me is the Miles Bridges thing, where they now don't really have much value with Miles Bridges. And that's for obvious reasons. Miles Bridges, pled no contest to his domestic violence situation with the mother of his child and missed all of last season and is suspended, I think, for 10 games to start this season. I personally would have just let him walk. They have given him a 1 year, $7.9 million qualifying offer where I don't feel comfortable giving him $7.9 million after what he pled no contest to. And B, now he's an unrestricted free agent next offseason, so he can go sign anywhere he wants. And if he plays well, you better believe that there are teams that will probably sign him. On top of it, when he's on a qualifying offer, he does not have, or he has a no trade clause, which means he doesn't really he has bird rights with Charlotte, and those could be valuable to get him the most money possible, which means Charlotte could have an advantage in retaining him. That's why teams can't move somebody that is on a qualifying offer. But it's like, do you want to retain him is a real question. And do you have the means to do so is a real question. I don't have an answer on any of that. And that's what makes this hard. Like, it feels like to me, the qualifying offer is almost like the worst of both worlds in some way. Like, and again, that's not the Hornets front office's fault. It's the reality of the situation that is shitty. I also thought they could have tried to get a 4th year guaranteed with PJ Washington. I think PJ is a good basketball player. To do a 3-year, $48 million deal that extended way into the offseason, I thought was a bit bizarre. Ultimately, the two things this offseason is going to be remembered for, or are going to be remembered for, are taking Brandon over Scoot and signing LaMelo to this big deal. This offseason basically was the one that set the infrastructure for the Hornets for the next 4 or so years because of those two decisions. So it's a momentous offseason for them. Do you think it was the right offseason for them?
Well, we've talked about the Scoot Henderson, Brandon Miller thing long enough, and that is such a huge part of that core decision. Like, I agree with you. I would have taken Scoot Henderson. So it's hard to definitively say yes, but I do think that anytime you have a top 2 pick, the vision of getting him and LaMelo Ball locked in together, which, by the way, I really like the way that those two can play off of each other, particularly in kind of late shot clock offense. Those two guys, I think, are going to be a really effective tandem in, pick and pop and ghost scenarios and playing off of each other in different ways. Like, this is a roster that, in terms of late clock offensive creation, I think they lacked a lot of that. It makes a lot more sense now. But again, Scoot Henderson probably solves a lot of those issues just on his own. So I look at this roster right now, Sam, and I see how many overlaps there are between 2 years ago when they were making the playoffs or knocking on the door of the postseason. And they had some good talent then, and many of those guys are now back. But
so Adam, to be clear, the team that won 43 games last year in 2022, the guys who played the 6 most minutes on that roster, or 6 of the 7 guys, let's call it. Oh no, let's do this differently. 6 of the top 8 guys that were on that roster: Miles Bridges, Terry Rozier, LaMelo Ball, Cody Martin, PJ Washington, Gordon Hayward. They lose Mason Plumlee, in Kelly Oubre. Losses in terms of volume, and Mason was actually pretty valuable in terms of ball movement and being able to kind of be like that option in short roll scenarios where when teams blitz LaMelo, he's able to make plays with the ball in his hand and he can pass and take advantage of advantage situations. But it's fair to say, I thought that season, their 6 most important players were Bridges, Rozier, Ball, Hayward, PJ Washington, Cody Martin. All those guys are back. They add Brandon Miller in, who could be something early. They have Nick Richards, who has undeniably gotten better over the course of the last few years. I think he is like a pretty real backup center. They have Mark Williams, who could be a real starting center and could be a defensive anchor long term.
Yep.
Whether or not he'll be that this year, we'll see. If you're playing devil's advocate with the Charlotte Hornets,
yep.
and if I was a Hornets fan, this is what I would believe. Why are they not a team that goes over 500 again?
I don't have an answer for you, Sam. I think it's reasonable to take that approach and take that stance. I think where I would push back on it is that they're younger at the 5 than they were by having Williams and Richards there, and that is an area that can make a difference in some regular season games and really cost you in close ones when teams, like you said, want to blitz LaMelo Ball, turn up the intensity. Like, I worry about their kind of short roll creation or playmaking other than just trying to protect the rim and catch and finish. But I think the East has gotten better. To me, that's where the big difference comes in, is that there are more teams in that 5 to 11 range in the Eastern Conference who will win a couple more games each year than they did maybe 2 years ago. And that pushes down the win total for a team like Charlotte.
I think that's right, for what it's worth. I think that the league in general has gotten better. I think that there is more talent in the league than what there was previously. I also think the talent is more widely dispersed league-wide than what we've seen. Like, there are more talented teams kind of across the spectrum. The league goes deeper than what it did in 2022. A couple of other just random notes here. That team had Jim Borrego coaching the team. This one has Steve Clifford. That was a fundamental change in terms of just the overall way that these rosters play. Steve Clifford is a defensive-minded coach first and foremost. Borrego is like an offensive guy that really let LaMelo thrive and get up tempo and everything. We didn't really get enough of a sample yet to know what Steve Clifford's vibe is going to be there. Yep. In terms of whether or not LaMelo gets to really just like be LaMelo and go. He could. We'll have to see what Miles Bridges looks like coming back from his suspension. I don't love their wing in backcourt defense. I think that is where losing Dennis Smith is an enormous factor.
Yeah.
I don't think nearly enough people, and we can talk about this for the Brooklyn Nets section as well, not nearly enough people understood how good Dennis Smith was last season. In something like, he played how many minutes here? Dennis Smith played 1,300 minutes last season. He was worth 3.2 wins based off of EPM's model of estimated wins, purely based on his defense alone. He was one of like the 5 or 6 best guard defenders in all of the NBA last season. Yep. He was unbelievable, especially late in the season when Charlotte, which by the way, we just talked about like how fundamental difference between Borrego and Clifford. Charlotte was a top 6 defense from Valentine's Day onward last year. They were great on that end. But now you add LaMelo in, you add in, probably more Mark Williams minutes even than what we got. You add in Brandon Miller, who's just young and is going to be probably not a great defender early in his career because he's young. I don't think the defense will be quite that level that it was late last season. I think this team will be fun to watch. I think they will be competent. I think they will like it won't be like last season. Like, they were hard to watch really from it was weird. I forget like when LaMelo was kind of out, to be honest. Like, they were actually okay to watch from February onward. Like, they played pretty, again, like competent, well-structured basketball. It was like that window to me. It felt like from, I think, like November and December, where it felt like they were terrible. And like some of that involved LaMelo, but not really. And I'll be interested to see what that looks like this year, I guess, is where I'm at.
Yeah. Sam, I have a question for you on Charlotte, and this will be the last kind of thing from me. And it's a philosophical question more than it's specifically about Charlotte, but you'll see how it pertains to the Hornets right now.
Sure.
If you have a roster that is filled with offensive talent, but might struggle a little bit more personnel-wise in terms of defensive production, what type of coach would you rather have? An offensive guy who leans fully into weaponizing that, and the defense is the defense, or a defensive-minded guy who tries to make that a more competent end of the floor, but might sacrifice a little bit of the offensive firepower they have in order to make that happen?
I think it really depends on who your star players are. Like, I get that that's a cop out, and it's not what people want to hear.
It's cool.
But like, it really depends on who your stars are and how much of a sense of like accountability they need, how much of a sense of like leadership they just inherently have, and like willingness to take on their own flaws and improve their own flaws. Like, if you need a taskmaster that's like a defensive taskmaster, Steve Clifford's like perfect for this group. If you are more willing to improve on your flaws on that side, then I think that having more of a offensive minded guy probably works a little bit better with LaMelo, frankly. Like, you go back through a little, like the last few like title winners, right? Like Steve Kerr actualized the Golden State Warriors offensively with his movement and motion based offense, right? Frank Vogel actualized Anthony Davis and the Lakers and KCP defensively, and Danny Green and all those guys, right? It was a defensive-minded coach for a defensive-minded roster outside of LeBron. Steve Kerr was an offensive-minded coach for an offensive-minded roster with the Golden State Warriors. The Nuggets, like Michael Malone, is like more of a defense guy, and that is more of an offensive, structured roster, you could say. So it just depends on what you have, I think. I don't really have like a strong take one way or another on that end.
Yeah, I don't know where I land on it either, which is part of why I wanted to ask the question. I think Steve Clifford's a fantastic defensive coach.
Totally.
Like, unbelievable. Yep. And if there's anybody who can take this roster and turn them into a competent group on that end, he's who I'd put my money on. So I think there's reason for optimism in Charlotte, but I want to see it before I believe it.
I do too. It was a strange offseason, though. It was a bit of a weird offseason, just like trying. And look, they're going through like an ownership change as well. I have no idea how long Mitch Kupchak is going to be there for, now that there has been an ownership change, with the way that these things tend to go in terms of, turnover from front offices once a new ownership group takes over. Michael Jordan seemingly was quite involved in their front office. Who knows what this looks like moving forward. Let's go to the Chicago Bulls now. The Chicago Bulls had a very active offseason in free agency, did not have a very active offseason on the trade market or in the draft. No trades, despite many potential avenues for trades. They selected Julian Phillips in the draft. They traded 2 future seconds to get in at number 35 to take Julian Phillips. And then contractually, there's a big long list here. They signed Nikola Vucevic to that 3-year, $60 million extension, where I believe he's like trade eligible in like December or something like that. It's like 6 months after the extension. I think it's like late December that he'll be eligible to be moved. Or is it, he might be eligible to be moved. I can't remember. There's like some weird trade stuff with that deal because he signed it as an extension as opposed to a new contract when he was entering free agency, and didn't go super high on the number that he signed for. They signed Kobe White to a 3-year, $36 million contract. They signed Javon Carter to a 3-year, $19.5 million contract. That last year as a player option. Signed Ayo Dosunmu to a 3-year, $21 million contract. Signed Torrey Craig to a 2-year, $5.4 million contract. Last year player option. They brought in Terry Taylor and Adama Sanogo. They lose Patrick Beverley, Derek Jones, Javonte Green, and Marko Simonovic. And they still have 3 very important extension eligible players: DeMar DeRozan, Patrick Williams, and Alex Caruso. The Williams one is the one that's like really coming to a head because he has to make a decision at some point in the next like month and a half. Let's start here. The Bulls were an awesome defensive team last year. I think that went like completely under the radar, much like the Hornets being good defensively by the end of the year. The Bulls were a top 5 defense last year, largely on the back of Alex Caruso and Patrick Williams. Patrick Beverley was really valuable for them late in the year. I thought Ayo Dosunmu did a really good job as well. I thought like Derek Jones gave them really active, energetic defensive minutes. There are a lot of infrastructural reasons to believe in them being a good defense again, despite the fact they have Nikola Vucevic, Zach LaVine, and DeMar DeRozan on this roster, all of whom are like offense first players. I still just struggle to see what the direction of this team is. Yeah. And it really just feels like they're continuing to spin their wheels a little bit in a way that is confusing to me, because while the Bulls were a top 5 defense last year, they were not a good offense, even with all of that, like, supposed firepower. They were not a good offense, despite the fact that DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, and Nikola Vucevic, do you know how many games they missed last year combined?
I don't, Sam.
They missed 13 games combined last year.
For them.
And this was still the 24th best offense in the league. That's a real problem to me. And I just don't know. I don't know where the improvement comes from this group. Like Lonzo is not playing this year based off of all reports, right? You sign all these defensive guys like Javon Carter, Ayo Dosunmu, Torrey Craig, when there probably isn't much room for your defense to get better when you're going to have to play, 95 minutes of Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, and Nikola Vucevic. I'm just very confused on what the Bulls are doing here, kind of.
Yeah, I don't think there's another team around the league where you could point to every player on their roster and definitively say which end of the floor they're much better at. Like, this is a Bulls team where you look at them up and down, like, that's an offense guy, that's an offense, that's a defense, that's a defense, that's a defense. And they have really leaned into the infrastructure of, we're going to have our 3 guys, and we're just going to go out and get elite defensive connective piece role players. They like high IQ. They like competitive and gritty. The guys that help win you regular season games because they are just tryhards. Like Javon Carter, Ayo Dosunmu, Torrey Craig, Patrick Beverley, and it was that way last year. Like office linebacker Terry Taylor. Like, those are try-hard guys in the regular season who are going to go out there and just scrap their. Javonte Green was that guy. They're going to scrap their way to regular season wins. And Alex Caruso is.
But how many? They won 40 last year. Like, they didn't win a lot.
Right. That what we're seeing the flaws are in that regard is that they don't have guys who can shoot threes. Like, this 3-and-D moniker that we've really been built on over the last decade with role players. They excel on the defensive end with the role players they bought in, but they don't shoot a lot of threes, and they don't make enough of those 3-pointers. And the challenge is, like, DeRozan, to be his best, needs those guys. LaVine and Vucevic, they need those guys to knock down shots. Those 3 staying healthy and being really good, that doesn't carry an offense that far. Like, you need role players who knock down shots. So those 3 guys and 3 stars carry an offense when they command extra attention and they can create easy looks for guys who can knock those shots down. The Bulls still don't have guys who can knock those shots down. And what I was hoping for this offseason was maybe a little bit more emphasis on just finding a shot maker. But like Javon Carter, Torrey Craig, Ayo Dosunmu, I love all of those guys. I love the grit. I love the toughness, the identity they bring on the defensive end of the floor. They can't make shots enough. Like, it's at some point, it's a math equation that's just not in their favor.
It's interesting because, like, Javon can really shoot. It's just that he is not a guy that, like, takes a wild amount of them, right? He finally did, like, up the volume a little bit last year. Like, he shot 42% from three on over 4 3-point attempts per game in 22 minutes a night, right? That's what you need from somebody like that. You need him to be willing to shoot. But like that's not an enormous upgrade on like what Patrick Beverley was doing at the end of the year, right? Ayo Dosunmu is just like not a great shooter. Alex Caruso has consistently made shots. He just doesn't really take them.
Right.
Kobe White, Kobe White improved a little bit defensively last year. Like I do want to give him credit there. I still don't feel great about him playing with like both DeMar and Zach LaVine on the court at once defensively. So it's just the guy that they really need, and this is where it is, right? I'm assuming that the way that they rock this is they bring Alex Caruso off the bench with Kobe White is like a super sub situation, right? And they bring Javon Carter like into the starting lineup because he can be like the low usage, pesty offensive player, right? It's just weird to me to see where they're going to go with this. Because DeMar DeRozan has an expiring deal this year. And if DeMar leaves, they're kind of like nowhere. And now they have locked into all of these random 3-year deals with guys like Javon Carter, Ayo Dosunmu, Torrey Craig that work if you have both DeMar and Zach LaVine. They don't really work if you have just one of those guys. I just like kind of I don't know what their plan is. And look, like some of this sucks, right? Like Lonzo suffering this injury is fucking terrible. And that team was great when they had Lonzo. And Lonzo is like such an underrated player. They were put into like this weird circumstance. This offseason was kind of their chance to like get out of it. It felt like they could have like kind of pivoted away. This is the one where like the opportunity cost comes in for me. You could have pivoted away from Nikola Vucevic. You could have pivoted away and maybe moved DeMar DeRozan while he still had a lot of value league wide. Zach LaVine still has quite a bit of value. Instead, you leaned into this group that without Lonzo, like we haven't seen much reason to believe in them at this point, I guess, right?
I think that's very fair. Like I just keep going back to like they don't have enough volume shooters from role players, and they seem a little small. Like they're very guard heavy. I don't know. The opportunity cost doesn't bother me that much, but it bothers me more knowing that there might have been a couple other free agents or role players to go after that like would have tied this together a little bit better for the short term. In my mind.
Yeah, I get it. Like I see that some Bulls fans in the comments are like kind of yelling at me for, Javon Carter being a substantial shooting improvement in the lineup. Yeah, look, like he's made 40% of 3.2, 3-point attempts per game over the last 3 years. Right. Patrick Beverley over the last 4 has made 37% of his 3.9 3-point attempts per game over the last couple of years. And I think they get treated very similarly as shooters when they're on the court. Yep. That's the most important thing is how you get treated. Cole Krug asks, like, why not re-sign Vooch versus letting him walk for nothing? Yeah, I guess you could look at it that way. I get it. And I think that's like reasonable. I just don't know how valuable Vooch is on this contract. Like, I don't think they're going to get a first rounder for Vooch on a 3-year, $60 million deal, given his age, given the defensive, liabilities he potentially brings to the table. I know they were good defensively with him last year, but he's, I think that was more of an in spite of thing because Pat Williams and Caruso and, Pat Bev and some of those other guys like really brought intensity around him on the perimeter. So I say all this to say, I was surprised the Bulls just kind of went in on this group this offseason, given that they were a 40-win team last year. And given that they got all of the health in the world, like if Zach LaVine misses 15 games this year, or if DeMar DeRozan misses 15 or whatever, they're in a real problem situation. The guy that they need to be good is Patrick Williams. They need Patrick Williams to take a leap on offense. That is the entire game for them at this point. Doing all of this is a bet on Patrick Williams taking a leap on offense, I think. Everything they did this offseason is a bet on Pat Williams.
Yeah. Yeah. When you put it like that, you're damn right it is. So interesting season for him coming up. I like a lot of the individual players. I like the defense and the grit and the intangibles. I still don't get how it works together. I really don't.
I don't either. Okay. The Cleveland Cavaliers are up next. The Cavs, much more playoff capable team, I think, this year. They acquired Max Strus in a sign and trade for Cedi Osman and Lamar Stevens. Really, really good. They brought back Karis LeVert on a 2-year, $32 million deal. Strus got a 4-year, $62 million deal. George Niang, they signed to a 3-year, $25 million deal. They bring in Ty Jerome to a 2-year, $4.6 million deal. They signed Craig Porter Jr. to a 2-way deal, which I actually really liked and wanted to note that. And all of those guys will replace Danny Green, Dylan Windler, Robin Lopez, Raul Neto. They drafted Imani Bates in the draft as well. It's worth noting. He'll spend most of his year in Canton, I would think. Or wherever I think the G League team is no longer in Canton. Yeah, I think it's in Cleveland now.
Cleveland
say
now.
that.
Yeah.
The thing that the Cavs struggled with in the playoffs against the Knicks was not having a coherent, competent fifth option offensively on the court. Isaac Okoro does not get treated as a shooter. Karis LeVert does not get treated as a shooter. They went out and they got in Max Strus and George Niang, two guys that can really step in and knock down shots. Max Strus particularly was just an essential role player on a Miami Heat team that made the NBA Finals. He's a good one-on-one on-ball defender. George Niang is as smart as they come. These two guys give you an immense amount of lineup flexibility. They give you a lot more off the bench when your starters leave the table. The Cavs last season, in the regular season, for people who are unaware, had the second best net rating in the NBA at plus 5.6. They were the best defensive team. They were a top 10 offensive team. They still have Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen as your top four. I think the Cavs last year, they won 51 games. I think they win more than 51 games this year in the regular season.
They're really fucking good, Sam. This roster's really good.
You're going to get internal growth from Evan Mobley. You're going to have another year of continuity from Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell playing together. They're deeper. They have more shooting than what they did a year ago, which, by the way, we talk a decent amount about shooting on this show because it is so important. This team took the 24th most three-point attempts in the league last year. Part of that was pace-based, but all of those three-point attempts coming basically from Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, or at least I think more than half of them, because Donovan was taking 9.3 and Darius was taking 6 of them. This team is going to be an awesome regular season team. They're going to be unbelievable regular season team.
They're super fun. They defend. I love the fact that I'm kind of eating my words about how Mobley and Allen can fit together. And that pairing looks sensational for the Cavs down low. And it gives them such defensive dominance through the regular season that they can get away with more offensive firepower 1 through 3. And that's where leaning into that and letting guys like Strus and Niang, I don't want to throw Strus under the bus. He's solid on the defensive end of the floor, but it allows the Cavaliers to lean in a little bit more to raising that offense to an elite level. And I think this could be the year when they really take that leap. I absolutely absolutely love Darius Garland. He is the one guy that I don't think gets talked enough about because Mobley has been so good on defense and Donovan Mitchell has come in and quickly changed the trajectory of the franchise. Darius Garland is one of the more well-rounded offensive players that you'll find in this league. Like a really good combination of on-ball and off-ball, play, make, and score. I'm a huge Darius Garland fan. If he can take another leap, this is like a 56 plus win team to me.
I kind of think I agree with you. And they have a little bit more versatility in terms of the lineups they can throw out there is the big reason why. Like last year, it just feels like they don't have a lot of confidence in Dean Wade. They lose Chetty Osman, who was a struggle bus, it felt like a lot of the time on defense to me. Kevin Love was, for whatever reason, able to like really bring it back on the Miami Heat, but was not there for the Cavs, was not nearly as effective. Danny Green was, he was, it felt like he was done by the time the playoffs rolled around. And I know he didn't play a ton of regular season minutes, but nonetheless, right? Like this is a really loaded, deep team this season that has real floor spacing around Evan Mobley, around Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. It's going to be easier for Garland and Mitchell to be able to get into the paint and drive and create things this year than what it was last year, because someone's going to always have to stay attached to Strus, to Niang in the corner. Yeah, they're going to be good.
Yep.
They're going to be really, really good, I think. And look, their playoffs will depend on a couple of things. They need to find, I think, first and foremost, the right matchup. The Knicks were just a really bad matchup for them last year. Second, they need Evan Mobley to take a leap, not just in terms of a defensive help defender all over the place, being able to like move around and fly around, but also as a defensive rebounder and anchor on the interior that also can do a little bit more of the ball in his hands. If he can play real minutes to 5 in the playoffs, that is the thing for them.
Yep.
And typically year 3 is when these guys that are a little bit skinny, that have like center measurements, are able to slide into that role a little bit more often. I have hopes that Evan Mobley will be able to take situational minutes in that role in the playoffs when necessary, not to like completely remove Jared Allen from the equation, because Jared Allen, by the way, was probably a top 10 defender in the NBA last year. Jared Allen and Evan Mobley both being top 10 defenders, Mobley a top 5 defender. That's the reason this was the best team defensively in the NBA last season.
Yep.
They will continue to be that as long as they have both of those guys there in the regular season. But like Mobley being able to slide down and play the 5 more often is what changes them from a regular season juggernaut to a really, really good potential playoff team that can get multiple shooters out there on the court with Garland and Mitchell. They can get, you know, potential 3-and-D guys out there. Like it's really, really important for Mobley to be able to slide down and play the 5. Any leap that he takes this year is really big, I think.
Yeah, I like the lineup flexibility. I think that's a good call for them moving forward to the playoffs. But what I like is the natural progression of how Kobe Altman and company are kind of building this roster, right? You see if the too big experiment works. Then you go out and you make a major move for another star player. That's your next offseason to try to say, okay, now we've got a ton of talent and a unique kind of roster build. And then you find the right role players next to them. And where they've really leaned into was saying this Allen and Mobley defensive group is so dominant, even with guys like Mitchell and Garland, who aren't known for being top tier defenders on the perimeter, but we still have the number 1 defense in the NBA. We can lean a little bit more into offense with our role players. Let's go out and get George Niang. Let's go out and get Max Strus. Let's try Ty Jerome for not much money at all. And a guy who like can really shoot and play on ball and off ball and has legitimate offensive value in this league. Like he could be in for a very good year because he knows he's got those 2 rim protectors behind him. I just love the the way this Cavs roster has been thought out and the way that it has progressed to get to this point. Like, they're going to continue to get better.
Yeah, I think they're going to keep getting better too. I've seen some like conversations preliminarily about like the Cavs need to look at moving Donovan Mitchell already. I think that is like so premature based on where they are right now. He still has this year and next year locked in. There is like no argument for even considering moving Mitchell based on where they are right now.
Yeah.
The other piece of this, and I mentioned it in the extension eligible section here on the YouTube video, which, by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. If you're listening to the podcast version, go to YouTube, subscribe. You will be able to watch these shows with real graphics and everything like that, which break down what we're talking about. Really fun. We're getting a little bit more interactive here. The other piece of this that is interesting is Isaac Okoro. He is extension eligible. He is a good defender. Like, he has proven his worth on that end. He continues to get just like a little bit better offensively every year in terms of his role. He still does not take many threes, and that is ultimately the biggest problem for him. He needs to become a confident three-point shooter, not just a three-point shooter.
Yeah.
But over the last 2 years, Isaac Okoro has taken over 300 threes and made them at like a 36% clip. And I think I would want to re-sign him if I was Cleveland. I don't know what the number is. Maybe it's like 445 or something. I wouldn't want it to be super high given the fact that he has not seen a lot, but I would want to continue to go down this road. And if I could get a discount on him, I would want to do it.
All right. I guess I could understand that. I can't get the taste of the postseason out of my mouth from that. And I still think you want extension guys and second contract guys who help you in the playoffs. And I saw real threats to that from Isaac this year.
And he's 22. And if he can shoot
He's
even
young.
a little bit,
he's young.
If he can shoot if he can make 36% of his threes when he's taking 5 of them per game, as opposed to like 2.5 per game, he's wide open. That's the biggest thing why these threes fall, right? He is wide ass open every single time. But I don't know. I still love the way he plays. I still love the like wrecking ball attitude that he brings. I have like a little bit of faith, a little bit to where I would want to continue to go down that road, because it's going to be hard for the Cavs to find guys like him.
Sure.
Moving forward. That's neither here nor there, though, at this point. I think Okoro can be valuable with the Cavs, but he still has a leap to go in order to get to that level. The thing is, though, they need somebody like him as like a defensive-minded player that can guard backcourt players.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of continuing down that road. Okay. Next up is going to be the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas Mavericks were active this offseason in reshaping their roster. The biggest note is that they signed Kyrie Irving to a 3-year, $126 million contract. They retained him after acquiring him over the trade deadline. The details on that deal are interesting. According to Spotrac, he has a last year player option and a 15% trade bonus, which feels important for a Kyrie Irving situation, given how the last few situations have ended. The thing that Dallas did best was completely reshape their defense around Luka and Kyrie. So at the draft, they trade number 10 and Davis Bertans to Oklahoma City, and they get Derek Lively, a 7'1" big from Duke, who long-term should be their defensive anchor on the interior. I don't know that he'll be able to play more than like 10 minutes a night this year. He is definitely somebody that will take a lot of work offensively, but he has real defensive anticipation and real capabilities. They acquired the number 24 pick and Rashawn Holmes from Sacramento on draft night and selected Olivier Maxence Prosper, a 6'8" wing from Marquette. He is a guy I think will play pretty early for them because he is an awesome defensive player who can take on tough assignments at the 3 and the 4. The other guy they got that takes on tough assignments that hit the 3 and the 4 is Grant Williams. They traded And I don't think I realized they gave up as much as they did for Grant, to be
Yeah, they
honest
give a
with you.
lot. Yeah.
So they traded, I believe, 2 seconds to Boston for Grant Williams. And then they moved Reggie Bullock and an unprotected 2030 first round pick swap to San Antonio for Grant Williams. That unprotected pick swap for a team that has Victor Wembanyama is something that we're going to look at in like 6 years if Luka leaves Dallas for some reason and be like, oh shit, this was bad. All of that is very dependent on what happens with Luka. It's not worth speculating on that. But that one is one that I'm watching and I'm just like, oh, that could be a fun one. They signed Grant Williams to a 4-year, $53 million deal. They retained Dwight Powell on a 3-year, $12 million deal. They bring in Seth Curry and Dante Exum on deals that are guaranteed for this year, like at a combined $7 million. They signed Derek Jones Jr. to a 1-year, $2.7 million deal. They waive JaVale McGee. His contract will be stretched over the next 5 years at a $2.3 million cap hit. And you look at who they got rid of, it's Christian Wood, who was a no defense player, Theo Pinson, Frank Ntilikina, Justin Holiday, and Markieff Morris. A fascinating offseason where the infrastructure defensively that you can see in Dallas now, they can do some weird, fun things where like they play wildly small with like Maxi Kleba at the 5, Grant Williams at the 4, Grant like anchoring against bigs, Maxi being like a crazy help defender. They still have Tim Hardaway Jr. on this roster. They still have Josh Green on this roster. He's an enormous piece of where they're going. Mm-hmm. If you watch Dante Exum with Australia as well during the World Cup, you saw a guy that I think very clearly looks like a player that will be valuable in the rotation at the end of the day for Dallas. Is just a up-tempo, like, transition pusher with Kyrie particularly, I think, given that Kyrie, I think, likes to play a little bit more up-tempo than what people often give him credit for. A really fun roster now. Dante is a good defender. Omax is a good defender. Josh Green's a good defender. Maxi's a good defender. Grant Williams is a good defender. Like, there's just a lot there. There's truly just a lot there that I really like.
Yeah, I like the moves. I like the young players too. I like Derek Lively. I like Omax Prosper. And of course, I like Jaden Hardy and what he can continue to turn into. Like, those are 3 valuable depth pieces. The question for me is just, can you get anything really consistently out of one of them this year? Because if you can, and one of those guys turns into a rotation player or a plus rotation player, I like where Dallas is headed. But if you remove those 3 guys from the rotation, so to speak, right? Like Lively and Prosper aren't quite ready, and Hardy still has some of his decision-making and kind of, flaws that allow him to not play next to Kyrie or Luka. It does feel like they're one piece short in some regard. Like, they've got better role players and a better cohesive plan, but talent-wise, I wish there was just one more guy.
I do wish they had one more guy, but for a Dallas team that like desperately needed to overhaul its defense this offseason, and you're going to build around Luka and Kyrie, at least for the next 2 years, you needed to do all of this.
Yeah.
Like this is all the infrastructural moves that you had to make in order to have a chance, I think. And they have young guys now defensively that can build and grow with Luka in Josh Green, Omax, and Derek Lively. Honestly, like, if Lively is ready to play by year 2, it'll be a win. If he's ready to play by year 2 and like be valuable, that'd be huge for Dallas. Like, it'd be enormous. If he's ready to play it all this year, it'd be enormous for Dallas. I'm skeptical on that front. And I think that's probably why they brought back Dwight Powell. I would expect that Dwight Powell starts for this team still, but there's just a lot here that you can really make work, I think, if you're Dallas.
Yeah, and the underrated piece to all of this to me continues to be Josh Green and Tim Hardaway Jr. as guys who on the wings are not just valuable, Green because of his defensive acumen in some regard, but this is a team that can and will continue to mismatch hunt and punish poor defenders. And
Yep.
what Hardaway and Green do as screeners and guys who go up there and force those mismatches while being able to knock down shots is really, really important. Like, it's a simple brand of basketball on the offensive end, as long as you have some of those guys out there, which is why I'm glad they're leaning into the defensive framework and some of their other role guys.
And by the way, my take on Josh Green is that they should sign him to an extension now versus later, because Josh Green looked good for Australia. And I think he's going to look really good with this team. He is, to me, like an immediate starter at the 3 for them. Play him with Grant Williams at the 4, play probably Dwight Powell at the 5, I guess. Hope that Lively continues to make real growth. You bring Tim Hardaway Jr. as like your instant offense off the bench. But yeah, it's very interesting. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah. Can I just ask you, Sam, what's going to happen here with Christian Wood? Like, what's going on, man?
I don't know. I truly have no idea. I have no idea. I'm not going to speculate on that.
No,
I don't know where it goes.
I'm not asking necessarily for like who's going to sign him and for how much, but it's like, what do you do with a player like that right now? Like, he can score the crap out of it. Like, there's no doubt about it.
I don't know. I have never been in on the Christian Wood hive personally, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask. Maybe we'll go with on this.
Fair enough.
But I think Dallas is a playoff team this year. I think their defense is going to be good, or at least better. Like, if they can get to league average on defense, if they can get to 18th on defense from 24th last year, this team is like probably a 48-win team, you would think, with Luka and Kyrie. But, we'll see if Luka and Kyrie stay healthy, and as long as they stay healthy, it'll be a good team. Yeah. Let's move on. I love this offseason, though. This is one of my favorite off seasons, just in general, building around what you have.
Yep.
Okay. This next one's going to be a little bit shorter because Denver just did not do much. Denver did not make a trade. They let Bruce Brown, Jeff Green, Thomas Bryant, Ish Smith, and Jack White go. They signed Reggie Jackson to a 2-year, $10.3 million deal. They signed Justin Holiday to a 1-year, $3.2 million deal. They brought back DeAndre Jordan to a 1-year, $3.2 million deal. And in the draft, they made some, this is where their trades did happen. They traded a 2029 protected first that I think is like top 20 protected. Like, it's very protected. For a 2024 first, a 2024 second, and the number 37 overall pick in this draft. That was Hunter Tyson, who looked great at Summer League. Then they traded that 2024 first that they got from Oklahoma City and the number 40 pick to Indiana for number 29 and number 32. That was part of some weird like 4-team deal. Anyway, they ended up with Julian Strawther and Jalen Pickett. I love their ideas here. I love that they have gone out and gotten young players in Strawther and Pickett and Tyson, who all should be ready to play like pretty early, kind of like how Christian Brown was ready to play pretty early. I wish I was a bigger fan of Pickett particularly, and I wish that I thought Strawther was a little bit better defensively than what I do think he is. But Strawther's shooting on this roster, if I was Denver, I would have had Julian Strawther much higher on my personal board than where he was. I would have probably had him right around 29. Hunter Tyson for Denver, I would have had him, I think I had Hunter at like 45 or so. I would have had him probably, a little bit higher than where they took him, probably right around where they took him. Losing Bruce Brown, Jeff Green, particularly, it's a big investment in Peyton Watson being ready to play. I think Peyton Watson's going to be fine. Like, I think he's going to be able to play. And Christian Brown will move into the Bruce Brown role, is my bet. Peyton Watson moves into the Christian Brown role. And then they just need to find one of those younger players or Justin Holiday to be able to step into that Jeff Green role. I think there's a chance this bench is going to be just like slightly worse than what it was last year. Bruce Brown's a big loss. Like nobody's going to deny that Bruce Brown is a huge loss. But if you think that Christian Braun is as good as I think Christian Braun is, I think that there's probably not as enormous a drop off here as what maybe has been indicated.
I really like Christian Braun. I think they're going to miss Bruce Brown an absolute ton. The point that I kind of make about the veterans and the lack of experience on that bench is, hey, there's always late February. Like there's going to be buyout markets or different opportunities where you can sign somebody who wants to come play in a championship situation. Like no better spot to go than with the reigning NBA champions. So I think this bench will look different by the end of the season. So I'm not going to judge the unit as a whole right now. I'm going to more so look at kind of the idea behind these younger pieces. And when I say younger pieces, I mean their draft picks. Like Tyson, Strother, and Pickett are all kind of older guys. I always like Strother and the shooting ability that he can provide. I love the idea of him in transition in Denver. Hunter Tyson was great in summer league, and like I'm starting to come around a little bit on Jalen Pickett. I'm like you, I wasn't that high on him, but like his just cerebral play has kind of dragged me across the picket line, if you will. So like I think that there's an opportunity for.
I saw that coming from like a mile away too, by the way. You still did it. And yeah,
we're getting too close, Sam. I think this is, you're starting to read the fastball coming here. But look, I like the idea of getting older rookies, of getting floor spacing wings, of finding a potential floor general for that second unit, and a guy like Pickett who can really create in different and unique kind of ways. Those are the right type of inexpensive flyers that the Denver Nuggets should be doing right now. And let the veteran stuff bear itself out later. You kept the main core of this team together. They're going to be fine.
Yep, that's right. Look, I don't have much else to say on Denver. They did what they should have done. They kept the band together and didn't overpay. It's all they could do or could not do. Okay. Next up is going to be the Detroit Pistons. The Detroit Pistons had a quiet-ish offseason after the draft, let's go with. They acquired Monte Morris for a 2027 second rounder at the draft. They acquired Joe Harris for a 2027 second rounder from Brooklyn. At the draft, they took Asar Thompson, a 6'7" wing from Overtime Elite. They acquired the number 25 overall pick for number 31 and 2 future seconds. They took Marcus Sasser, a 6'2" guard from Houston. Later in the summer, the only thing they really did, and by the way, this says they signed DeAndre Jordan. They did not sign DeAndre Jordan. That's just I caught a bit of a hanger there. It looks like on the template I was using. They signed Isaiah Stewart to a 4-year, $60 million deal. That last year is a team option. It has $4 million in incentives. They signed Jared Rhoden, Malcolm Casalon, Buddy Boeheim, Tosan Abunam, Stanley Amude to like E10s in 2 ways. No longer on this roster: Hamidou Diallo, Corey Joseph, Rodney Magruder, RJ Hampton, Eugene Omoruyi, who, by the way, sneaky, not terrible.
He's good.
Was pretty okay for them last year. And they have a bunch of guys extension eligible: Monte Morris, Alec Burks, Isaiah Livers, Joe Harris, James Wiseman, Killian Hayes. Look, they essentially brought in like professional basketball players: Monte Morris, Joe Harris, and Marcus Sasser, who I think is going to be really good, in addition to Asar Thompson, and, replaced guys like Diallo, who I think is also a professional player, but Corey Joseph, who might not have a lot left, Rodney Magruder, RJ Hampton, and Omoruyi. Like, this team is way deeper. They have way more options. We talked about that on the podcast with Mark on Thursday last week. I think they're going to be a better team, frankly. I think they're going to be a lot more valuable. I think they're going to be just a lot more capable at the end of the day.
They're deep, man. Like they're deep, like 1, 2, and 3 spots. I still don't love the way the roster comes together at the 4 and the 5. Like I tend to believe that if you have multiple ball handlers and guys with the ball in their hands and a more rim-bound 5-man, it's probably easier nowadays to lean into just a bigger wing at the 4 than it is like a true 4/5 and a guy like Stewart. I still want to see how this fit comes together. I want to see how Asar, Jaden Ivey, and Cade Cunningham all make it work, and how Monty Williams can shuffle the rotations to make this really fit best for everybody. They've got a lot more talent. I like the word professionalism that you used. I think that's a common theme amongst the veterans and guys who are more role players on this roster, and that should incrementally help all of the younger guys put together. This all comes back to Cade Cunningham for me. I really believe in him being an absolute star player. I just want to see it and continue to see that take a leap. And if he is, I have a couple questions about how the younger players that they've picked the last few years bring out the best versions in Cade from a floor spacing standpoint. But I like the roster in general. And I think it's very, very, very easy to say they've gotten a lot better from where they were last year.
I keep selling myself on the Pistons a little bit more and more. I like that they seem to have really valued shooting. I still have some questions about like building a roster with like all of Jalen Duren, Jaden Ivey, and Asar Thompson as like somewhat questionable shooters. I think Jaden proved a little bit of that last year. Like he shot 37% off the catch from three last year. It's just that it's not his first option to shoot necessarily off the catch. I think that if you look at the kind of role player pieces on this team, getting Monte Morris, Joe Harris, Marcus Sasser, still having Isaiah Livers, still having Bojan Bogdanovic, still having Alec Burks, you have a lot of potential 40% three-point shooters on this group. I want to see lineups with three of those guys out there with Cade.
Yes.
Like, you can't do it all the time because you have Jaden Ivey. You can't do it all the time because you have Asar Thompson. You need to invest in those guys. I get that. I also want to see Cade and what he looks like and what you can do when you invest in him and give him some runway with real floor spacing and with real shooters out there. That's what I'm most looking forward to with Detroit. Detroit will go as far this season as Jalen Duren takes them defensively. Jalen really struggled last season defensively. I broke that down with James Edwards earlier this week over at The Athletic. I would implore people to go read that. Jalen has a ways to go. I think he'll get there eventually. It's just he's a teenager and it's hard to defend in the NBA as a teenager. And he's definitely their best defensive option at the 5 because the other two are Marvin Bagley and James Wiseman, both of whom are worse than he is defensively at the 5. I've talked about the Pistons quite a bit on the last episode. I don't really know that I need to do that a ton more. I will just say that I think that, well, here, let's finish on this. The Isaiah Stewart deal has gotten some consternation from people, let's call it. I can't really understand why. Isaiah Stewart is like a developing, solid defensive big who has the ability to play the 4 and the 5 as long as the jumper comes together and the ball handling skills like improve just a little bit. The jumper took a real leap last year. He's physical. He's the kind of tough dude that you want on your roster. Like, I just kind of buy that dude. I get that the advanced numbers and the stats don't look great. Like, I use advanced numbers and stats as much as anybody. I get it. I just also think there's a lot that he brings to the court that the numbers don't capture. And I think this deal was fine, especially given that they have a team option on the end of it. Like this is a great contract, I think, for Detroit. It's what he's worth, I guess, is what I would say. Like he got a deal for what he's worth, and it's a 3-year deal. If it doesn't work well, it's a 4-year deal. If it does work well, like this is a good deal for Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, I still will die on the hill that he and PJ Washington should just switch teams and everybody wins. That's just that continues to be what I kind of say there. But no, I like this offseason from Detroit. They got better. They got better role players. The shooting thing is really, really important to me. But they have real depth. And the last thing I'll say on Detroit is I really hope that they don't let the search for what a younger role player could be get in the way of maximizing what your core players should be. that the idea of exploring around the margins, particularly in a year or so when you might not be this might be your last chance before you are a contender, to find a lot of that real cheap, valuable young role player guy. And don't let the search of that guy get in the way of maximizing Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Ausar Thompson, and Jalen Duren. Those are the four. Those are the four with the most potential. Those are the four who have shown something through their rookie seasons or coming into the draft year this year with Ausar. Do not let exploring the fringes get in the way of maximizing those four.
Yeah, like stop with this James Wiseman Duren stuff. Stop with this like Marvin Bagley Duren or Wiseman Bagley stuff. Like,
stop it.
You have real options, use them. Honestly, like I noted on the last show, like I would start Alec Burks if I was them. Burks has been a consistent 40% 3-point shooter. I like the idea of going like Cade, Ivy, Burks, Boyan, and Duren to start, because the other thing that bringing Isaiah Stewart off the bench does is it minimizes the amount that you have to play a backup 4-man. Like, you don't have to play both Wiseman and Bagley. You can play one of them for like 8 or 10 minutes a night. You can play Stewart at the 5 for 15 minutes a night. You can play him at the 4 for 12 minutes a night. You can play, Boyan at the 4 for minutes. You can play, you could like do Ausar Thompson at the 4 for some minutes here and there if you want to. Like, you can steal minutes, I think, across the positional spectrum, but like the Bagleys, the Wisemans, the Killian Hayeses, you have enough guys to where you don't have to keep developing them at this point. All due respect, Killian, he's become like a useful defender. And like, I don't think he should be out of the NBA after his next deal, much in the way that like Frank Ntilikina is stuck around the fringes, but you have your ball handlers now. You don't really need it. And yeah, Steve, like I agree that Cade, Ivy, Burks, Boyan, Duren is terrible on defense. You just have to find out what you have with Cade on offense first and foremost, I think.
Well, and you have to like expose Duren to those minutes and those reps. Like he has shown the potential to become that guy. Just because he's not very good right now doesn't mean you shouldn't put him in those types of situations where he's going to have to be exposed to when he becomes very good. Like, that's the thing about a developing team. You can't just hide guys from being exposed to what they're going to have to be when they're good players. You want that exposure when you're younger and you're not a great team, so that you can have that growth, get through it, get those reps, and know what to expect when you're playing those really, really meaningful games. I don't think that this should be a roster that, or a lineup that tries to hide those younger guys from it. Like, throw them out there and expose them to it. Show them what it's like. Show them how they need to defend. That will make them better long-term.
Yeah, and you don't need to make the leap this year. I know that like Pistons fans want to make the play-in. Yeah. I think that like the Pistons want to make the play-in based off of all their moves. You don't have to take that leap this year. This year is still, we need to know what Cade is. Like, first and foremost, like you can't leave unless he gets hurt again. You can't leave this season without knowing exactly what Cade Cunningham is and if he is a genuine potential number 1 option. I think he is, but we don't know for sure yet. And that's the thing they need to find out moving forward. Okay. Last team of our group here, the Golden State Warriors. The big move for them was moving Jordan Poole, Ryan Rollins, Patrick Baldwin, and a top 20 protected 2030 first round pick, as well as a second for Chris Paul. Then they re-signed Draymond Green. That was one that, throughout the season, especially early, you would hear, are they going to bring back Draymond? He just punched Jordan Poole in the face. Like, is this the end of Draymond in Golden State? By the time like February, March rolled around, it felt like it was going to be Draymond back in Golden State. He signs a 4-year, $100 million deal, last year player option, 15% trade bonus if he does move. I would expect that Draymond is a Warrior for life. Signed Dario Saric to a 1-year, $2.7 million deal. Signed Corey Joseph to a 1-year, $3.2 million deal. They do lose Dante DiVincenzo and Andre Iguodala, in addition to JaMychal Green and Anthony Lamb. I clearly missed the extension eligible section here again because I was tired when I was making these graphics. My God, my brain is broken irreparably. In the draft, they select Brandon Pajemski, a 6'5" guard from Santa Clara, and they acquired the number 57 pick from Washington for cash and took Trace Jackson Davis, a 6'9" big out of Indiana. Kind of a ho-hum summer for the Warriors. Like the big one is they now have Chris Paul instead of Jordan Poole.
Yeah.
They had to give up a first round pick to do it. But the Paul deal gives them a lot of potential flexibility in terms of how they move in search of a potential future star to pair with this aging core of Steph, Clay, and Dre. They also have Chris Paul, who is still a good player. Like he's still good at basketball. It's just the health that catches up with Chris, unfortunately, a lot of the time. And it's a big bet on losing Dante DiVincenzo and Andre Iguodala and JaMychal Green and Anthony Lamb on their young guys, and hoping that Moses Moody, Jonathan Kuminga, maybe Pods can play a little bit. I wouldn't expect that necessarily, but they just have guys that can play. They also lost Ty Jerome as well. I'm realizing I missed him in the gone section, but yeah, like real team, real good, like real potential NBA champion next year. I think can make a case this might be like the last year of their window, but people have been saying that for multiple years now. I think any year is the last year potentially of their window. Yeah. What do we think of the Warriors offseason now that they have Chris Paul on this roster?
I still don't know what to make of that fit. I still don't know what to make of the long-term agenda there. Like there's something that feels very D'Angelo Russell to me about this. Like this is the acquire a guy knowing that we got to get off of the Jordan Poole deal and then move this deal for the guy that we really want next. And I don't know how to feel about that, but that's at least what it smells like to me right now. I like Šarić quite a bit. I think that's an intriguing signing for them. I think they're going to miss DiVincenzo. Like to me, that is going to be one of the most underrated departures this entire offseason is losing him from that backcourt. And kind of you look around at who they've replaced him with, like an aging Corey Joseph and a guy in Pajemski who I wasn't crazy about. I don't know if he's going to come in right away and be able to do much. Like I like Moses Moody a lot. I think it's a very different role than what Dante DiVincenzo was able to give them. So he is going to be missed, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think that what he brought defensively and what he brought as like a secondary ball handler will be missed. Chris Paul is like kind of a weird combination of like both him and Jordan Poole because of the offense that Chris Paul still can bring to the table. Dante's a little bit more hit or miss on that end, whereas Chris can really get efficient offense. The other piece of this that's interesting is like the Warriors like to go, they like to run, they like to try and get up tempo. Chris Paul does not. Like Chris Paul is going to play slow. He's going to play deliberately. What does it look like? Because Chris Paul is going to have to fit into them. Like it's not a situation where the Warriors are going to fit into Chris Paul.
Right.
Even though every other situation that Chris Paul has been in his career has tended to fit around Paul as opposed to the other way around. That's not going to happen with Golden State. They have their scheme. They have their system. This is what they're going to do. They're going to play motion offense. They're going to get up and down. They're going to play in transition. They're going to do all of that. How does Chris Paul's more deliberate style fit with that is going to be the most interesting piece of the Warriors. And do they just envision him as like a contractual placeholder in a potential deal for another player this year? Because that Chris Paul contract is incredibly valuable. It will give another team $30 million in cap space if they want it next offseason. If they want to make a move deadline, they can get $30 million in cap space from immediately by acquiring Chris Paul, because that deal is non-guaranteed. We've seen the Warriors do this before with D'Angelo Russell, sign a placeholder max after Kevin Durant left. I wonder if they're looking at it like that as well. I think that would be a good way to look at it. It's a very valuable contract.
Yeah, that's what it smells like to me. I don't know if now is the right time to try to conject who those players or targets might be. And I think that there are certainly going to be some that come available or might be more available through the season than there are at this moment in time.
Yeah.
But I like the fact that that is an option for them. It might be a little bumpy right out of the gates to try to see that fit and that cohesion work with Chris Paul on the Warriors. But that's what it smells like to me. This is a chip to get the right guy in with this core.
I will give you one name that I think is interesting.
All right.
If the Raptors start out quite poorly by like the time February rolls around, I wonder if Pascal Siakam really lines up for them.
Ooh, boy. Okay, so Toronto would need more back, though, right? Like you'd need.
Well, you have Moody, you have
Moody,
Kuminga, you have Podziemski, like you have all these guys that like are at least valued somewhat league wide, and that's an expiring deal, which is why I say him versus. By the way, OG Anunoby is also on an expiring deal. You could easily say Anunoby for this too, but I think if the Raptors do not play well this year, there is a lot of synergy between a Warriors-Raptors deal. I think the Raptors are going to try and contend, and I think that's their goal for sure. But the Raptors did not make the play-in last year. Or did not make the playoff last year. I'm sorry. They did make the play-in. I don't know that they're better than what they were last year necessarily. They lose Fred VanVleet. Like, that's a huge loss. I think there's a lot of synergy between a Warriors and Raptors deal, is what I would say.
Very
for Anunoby or Siakam, one of the two.
Very, very interesting. Huh.
Okay. The Warriors, they'll be great. They're going to be really good. Their offseason was quiet outside of that Jordan Poole for Chris Paul deal, which we have talked about ad nauseum. Adam, we went for 2 hours. That was a little bit longer than what I wanted. We ended up talking for about 10 minutes per team. I wanted 8. I felt like that is okay on some level.
10 works for me. I thought we got in everything we needed to.
We got in what we needed to. Adam, tell the people where they can find your work, and then I will explain what's going on with the podcast over the next 2 weeks.
Sure. Anyone who wants to find me and my work, follow me on Twitter at @theboxandone_, my Substack page, theboxandone.substack.com, or my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Adam Spinella. I have kind of pre-published most of my work, so to speak, and scheduled it out. My wife and I are expecting a child here in the next couple of weeks, so I'm going to be doing a little bit less on the public side of things right now, but have some think piece articles coming out, really focused around just philosophical topics around the NBA draft. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, head on over to my Substack page and check it out progressively over the next month.
Okay. So here's what's happening with the podcast the next 2 weeks. On Tuesday, I think, could be Thursday, probably Tuesday, Andrew Schlecht is coming through, and we're going to do the second of these, 11 to 20. Or wherever Oklahoma City is, they're right on the border of that 20 mark. It'll be either the last third of teams or the middle third of teams. Also on, I believe, Thursday in the United States, which is why I want Schlecht to come on Tuesday, and I think he's going to. The G League Ignite plays the Perth Wildcats. And Adam is going to come back on after that. And we're going to talk about either on Friday or on Thursday. I'm not sure which day it'll be yet, depending on how late I want to make Adam stay up. And we're going to talk about, from a draft perspective, what we saw from Modest Buzelis, Ron Holland, Alex Sarr, Thierry Darlan, Izzy Almanza, et cetera, right? That's a huge prospect game. It's the version of, Ignite versus Metropolitans last year. Sarr looks really good for Perth. I'm just going to tell people, like, if you've seen any of Perth's like early season scrimmages, he looks great right now. And I am fascinated to see what he looks like against the Ignite. Next week, Laura and I are on vacation. I'm finally taking a week and like not looking at basketball, which means I'm going to schedule out podcasts for the next few days or next few weeks. I have an idea of what I want to do for that week. And as we get later in the week and I hear back from the person I want to do that with, I will let you guys know if once it becomes finalized. My guess for next week, though, is the final third of off-season recaps, and then two other things that are also within a like season preview kind of mode. So keep it locked here. I'm excited. I'm excited to go on vacation more than anything.
Yeah.
After that next weekend, I am up in the Gold Coast for the NBL Blitz, where I'm hoping I'm going to be able to get like Alex Sarr and AJ Johnson and Bobby Klintman and some folks, either for the podcast or for writing. I'm not sure yet which it'll be, which one. Honestly, I might just do both at the end of the day. But double dipping and like trying to like kind of write and podcast and do like a little thing. So that's the current plan for the show over the next like couple of weeks, 3 weeks. Adam, we'll figure out a schedule in terms of you coming back. I have no idea when that'll be.
Me either, Sam.
Okay. This has been the Game Theory Podcast. Please remember, rate, review, subscribe, do everything you can to support the show. Again, go to that YouTube link, please. It is valuable for you to go to that YouTube link because we had graphics today that you were able to follow along with. Also, it's the best place to watch the show because you get to see Adam and I talking. You get to see what's going on the show. It's a little bit more, engaging, and we try and like involve people as much as we can, everything like that. Go watch the show on YouTube. Go subscribe on YouTube. You'll know when we're going live. We record all these shows live over on YouTube and then bring them over to the podcast feed where many of you still listen to the show. Okay, Adam, that's what I've got. Until next time, we will talk soon.